Hi, my name's Thete and welcome to the first of a new series of top 10s based on World of Warcraft. So the intention is that these top 10s be interactive. In other words, you guys vote and those votes decide the rundown. My editorial control comes in the form of choosing suitable candidates for responses only. I'm going to give more details about how you can get involved in this at the end of the video. Now for this one, because it's the first, I'm doing a personal one which I have decided for myself. The topic for this video is top 10 non-boss raid features that have most excited me during my time in World of Warcraft. You may not agree, but from the next video, you get a say in procedures. Number 10 for me is attunement quests. Now, the reason it's number 10 is of course in many ways they are pretty bad. One of the downsides to these is that people joining late on in an expansion or wishing to re-roll an out is going to struggle. But at the same time, if you went through the whole expansion, it did give you a real feeling of the purpose of your assault on the raid. There were a lot of quests leading up to it, starting off with solo stuff, moving into dungeons, maybe the heroic dungeons in TBC, and then moving into the first few bosses of a raid, and you really did get a sense of progressing through the raid via these quests. Now, I don't think there's ever been an expansion where the story hasn't been good, so it's not that it made the story better as such, but by having to do attunements, you couldn't really miss that story out, and it all seems somehow better connected. Of course, as I've said before, I very much understand the reasons for removing them, and they are good ones, but on a personal level, I still miss them, so that's my number 10. Number 9 is a modern one, and that is skipping bosses in Warlords of Draenor. Now, for so many raiders now, myself included, the progress becomes the main enjoyment of the content. This means that although value is seen in farming, in terms of gearing up for the next round of progress, once the instance is on easy farm, it can become a little tedious. Naturally, the ready wit on display eases the pain, but wouldn't it be great if we could just miss some bosses out? Well, in WoD, this became a reality. Highmaul had not, for the first time, some optional bosses, and then Blackrock Foundry introduced the concept of being able to skip straight to the last boss after demonstrating some experience via quests. Of course, having the other bosses in Wings also helped you to pick out some of those early ones if you wanted. In Hellfire Citadel, it was even more important to be able to do this because of the differing item levels of the gears on the bosses. And what this meant was it made it easier to target the best loot pinatas and also to farm mounts more efficiently when gear was no longer important, without having to do bosses that nobody really wanted to do. Number 8 would be the Zul'Gurub Hoodoo pile. Now, this was basically a pile of skulls in the original Zul'Gurub raid instance, and you'd want to loot it for the punctured voodoo dolls. These allowed you, when you combined them with other materials, to get an enchant. Now, people would want to loot these. There was a danger, however, that you could become mind controlled when you tried to loot them rather than get the doll you wanted. Of course, as people went up to it very warily, everyone else in the raid, in the spirit of camaraderie, would target them all, with the intention of blasting them off the face of Azeroth if they turned hostile. Unless, of course, you're a paladin, in which case we just bubbled. Back in vanilla days, one of the prime ways as an alliance player of ensuring that enough gnomes died to appease the loot gods was in the form of mind control mechanics such as these. So, of course, in my raid leader role, I often forced the gnomes to actually carry out this grisly task. In 7th place are the goblins in Blackwing Lair. Now, after completing Razorgore, the first boss in original Blackwing Lair, it would be time to go into the next room for Velastris. However, half a dozen goblins would suddenly flee the scene. These were the mobs that dropped the Elementium, which is the material necessary for the completion of Molten Core legendaries. Thunder Fury relied upon this material. This meant chasing them down before they could escape with very few movement boost abilities at the time. It generated a decent amount of excitement as you psyched yourself up for the hunt to make sure that none got away. On this particular one, just to demonstrate, I got none of the Elementium needed though. Number 6 is the Fairlina pre-trash. Now this is in Naxxramas, but it's not the Naxxramas that exists now. This is the original Naxxramas. Now a lot of people wonder why the people who remember the original Nax say it was so hard when we've done it in Wrath when it first came out and it was a complete snooze fest. One of the main features to point out is just the massive difficulty in just completing trash. And the pre-Fairlina trash was an excellent example of this. Nowadays, or even when Wrath came out at level 80, you would just go into that room and you would just clear that trash. You wouldn't want to pull the whole room, but you'd deal with it as you do now. If you did that back then, you would be instantly one-shot. These bolts used to really, really hurt, to the point where only realistically the tanks ought to be taking them. So what we had to do was come up with a very elaborate way of pulling the trash such that the tanks could tank it, with the healers having line of sight to the tanks but not to these mobs. We had to basically line of sight ourselves so that we weren't getting battered by these poison bolts that would otherwise kill us. And if you got the positioning a little bit wrong, you could either end up getting killed yourself as a healer or not got line of sight on the tank. Clearing these areas of trash took a considerable amount of time by the standard of any raid before or since, and a massive amount of time by today's standards. Now, a lot of people, of course, would not find that fun. Today, trash is just one of those things we do to give the officers time to distribute loot and the rest of us time to tell a few bad jokes before doing the next boss. Number 5 is another piece of trash. It's like a hat trick of vanilla trash here, and it is in Molten Core, and it's the Core Hounds, after the first boss and before the second. Now, as I've said, in the modern era, trash is just something to do while officers do their stuff. There is a moderate risk of death sometimes if people are AFK or not paying attention, but very rarely are there any points of interest except the occasional dropping of some BOE loot. There have been other times where you were just rammed with excessive amounts of trash, such as in Ahn'Qiraj or Black Temple or parts of Ireland. But some trash is just fun, and the Core Hounds for me was an example of this. You had to kill them all at the same time, as living Core Hounds could regenerate their fallen brothers and sisters, come to that, after a short period of time. This meant a period of AoE, followed by hard switching to mobs on higher health. Had to tell people not to focus on individual Core Hounds, because if one died much before the last one died, they were all coming back up. You just had to tell everyone to take DPS off, let them all regenerate again, and then start again. It took a certain amount of coordination and a certain amount of keeping it in your pants. And of course, who were the ideal tanks for this? Paladins. Stand in the middle of them all and consecrate. Hooray! Number 4, it's the weekly quest for raid bosses. This came in Wrath. Now, I remember this in particular. Now, at the end of the Naxxramas patch, or the start of Wrath, I should say, before Ulduar came out, I left the game. I was really, really annoyed with the quality of raiding. I thought it had just gone to hell. I did not know what was to come, of course. And so I went off and played other MMOs. I sort of came back but just to play casually. But back to my old guild of Semper Fidelis on Ashdol Nerub EU, where I was, of course, just a social member now. Quite surprised I hadn't been kicked after I'd buggered off for a very long time. And they had these weekly quests into raids to kill a raid boss. So that was my first taste of Ulduar, being boosted by the very good raid guild. And yeah, I got to see some raids that I wouldn't have done otherwise, just playing as a casual player. But the idea of the weekly quest gave you a reason to maybe go back to older dungeons. And it's just a bit of fun. It was something an advanced guild, of course, has no use for the loot on that boss. But it's a nice bit of fun. It's just something to do on an off night. And for those who can get some use out of it, again, it gives you a reason to go back to maybe an older raid where maybe there'll be something that drops that is useful as well. Now, of course, we do have sort of weekly quests now. We can get them from our garrison. But because you can just go into LFR to do them if you want, and because the gear isn't really useful for a lot of raiders, it somehow lacks it. The weekly quests here, as I recall, gave you like the badges of justice, which was things that everyone could use. The equivalent of getting valor points now. So although we sort of had weekly raid quests now, it's not quite in the same thing. It doesn't have the same level of interest. People are not going to go and raid older content because of them. If it happens to be older content that comes up that week, you'll just ignore it. Number 3, and this might sound funny if I say this, but it's the idea of quests that run through an expansion. Now, what I'm talking about here are the legendary quest lines for Mob and WoD. Oh my God, are you crazy? You're always moaning about them. I'm not always moaning about them. I do moan about them. But it's worth noting that it's not the legendary item itself that I was fond of, which is just as well because that's going in Legion to be replaced by a much worse system. I am not at all keen on the legendary aspect of it, but the quest line arcing over the entire raid experience of an expansion is something that I have enjoyed and I'll miss in Legion. If only they'd been able to retain the quest line element without linking it specifically to gear. Now, there are, of course, strong storylines coming in Legion, but it's not quite the same thing. I'd be very happy if there was one overarching quest line, maybe personal to different classes, perhaps linked to your order hall, where you got items of use, but not like equipable items. It could be cosmetic items or something like that. I'd be more than happy with something like that. Maybe even a skin for your artifact. Number 2 was something again that came in Wrath, and it's the idea of raid achievements that reward you with a special mount. This mount will be of variable quality. Some of it is just sort of recolors of mounts that you can get more easily elsewhere. Some of them were pretty good though. The first one was a 310% speed mount at a time when the movement speed was a property of mounts rather than the player. So previously you could buy yourself mounts that could do 280% movement speed, but as far as I remember, now correct me if I'm wrong, up until this point the only people who could fly at 310% speed would be those lucky few who managed to obtain the Ashes of Allah. That is to say, those people who managed to roll 90 odd, like yours truly, but didn't have a gnome in the raid, who would then just roll one higher than you at the last second. The idea was that guilds who completed progress ahead of the release of the next tier could make the fights a little bit more difficult in order to obtain these achievements. This could extend the content by weeks or maybe even months. Of course, it later became possible to simply do them on a very easy level, so Mythic and Heroic guilds will tend to complete it on normal in a single raid event now. So they only extend the content for far fewer guilds, but still the idea of getting something, again, something cosmetic, doesn't have to be material, mount, I think it's a really good idea, and it's one of the best non-boss features in my personal opinion. Now, number 1 is something that they will never do again. They did it once and it was absolutely brilliant, but it didn't work. And I am of course talking about the Ahn'Qiraj Realm event. Now, for those who don't remember, back in vanilla, Ahn'Qiraj, the patch that brought with it, you could not get into the raid instances. You had to do an event that the whole realm had to participate in, turning in supplies. The raiders had to get someone to collect a load of items, complete very difficult quests, to be able to assemble a scepter with which they bang the gong and open up the gates of Ahn'Qiraj. Of course, this was a huge realm-wide event. Not only was it a unique event on your realm, but because everyone had pitched in, everyone felt very involved in it. Naturally, getting everyone all into one small space was not necessarily the best thing to do, because, of course, then the lag monster was released and some very strange things happened. But the idea, the concept of having this realm-wide event that everyone pitched in on, that wasn't the same on realms. It's not like that everyone could suddenly go into this raid. Your realm had to do something to be able to open it, so different realms would be able to open it more or less quickly than others. Again, it enhanced this element of what a lot of people think is missing, which is community. But yeah, can't be done again, because they now know that putting everyone in a small space is not great. And you could argue with cross-realm now, the sense of community within a realm is sort of disappeared as well. But it is absolutely the event, the non-boss raid event that I remember most fondly. And I only wish there were some way to do something like that again. But, Rudyard Kipling would very much have appreciated, because what you can say about the Ahn'Qiraj Realm event is that it met with both triumph and disaster at the same time. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And on to how you can influence the next one. Now, as I said, the editorial control I maintain over it is that I choose the potential answers. It may be that you would choose another one if it was open-ended, but there we go. So the next poll is going to be, what is your favourite raid from an artistic point of view? In other words, which raid instance do you think the art team put the most love in? There were the most little features, the best views. Now you can participate in this by following the link in the comments below. It will be open for 2 weeks. So let's have a look. It'll be towards the end of June 2016, after which it will close. Now, if you're watching this after that time, of course, it's too late to participate in that poll, but there's probably another one up at the same time. So if you click on the playlist, which will take you to where all of these polls will eventually be stored as more come in, then you'll be able to see which is the most recent one, and you'll be able to participate in that one. So thanks very much for watching. Make sure you share the link with everyone else as well, even if people aren't watching these videos. Let them choose as well. We want as many respondents as possible to give, so we don't just have like 11 people voting all on different ones and I've just got to go, oh, I'll do the order myself anyway. Let's make sure we get lots of people voting. Don't stack the vote. And until next time, I'll see you later.